At my hen do, my family sat my ex-boyfriend beside my fiancé and called it a forgiveness test. But my fiancé already had the recording that proved exactly who had invited him and why. My name is Alara Vance. I was 30 years old, wearing a pale cornflower blue dress I had bought with overtime pay, standing beside a dessert table at the Windermere Parish Hall, while the man who once emptied my savings account lifted a champagne flute toward the man I was about to marry. My mother smiled as if this were a moment of divine healing. My father nodded as if this were profound wisdom. My younger sister, Serafina, dabbed at her eyes as if the entire room had gathered to honor her delicate feelings instead of my survival. And when my ex, Dominic Sterling, leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for every aunt, cousin, neighbor, and family friend to hear, "If Alara really has grown, she should thank me for making her stronger," the room laughed. It was that careful, brittle way people laugh when they know something is profoundly wrong but do not want to be responsible for noticing. I was holding a silver cake server. I remember that because my hand did not shake. It should have. 5 years earlier, Dominic had drained the money I saved for my nursing registration and my first flat, blamed it on business stress, and watched my family turn his theft into my moral lesson. They said forgiving him would prove I was truly mature. They said clinging to anger would only make me bitter and unpleasant. They said love meant letting people back in when they had learned enough. But nobody at that hen do knew what my fiancé, Alistair, had in the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket. Nobody knew Dominic had called him 3 nights earlier. Nobody knew Serafina had been sending him messages for months. Nobody knew my mother had put the entire plan in writing because she believed a daughter trained to stay quiet would never dare ask for receipts. Alistair stood slowly. He did not shout. He did not insult anyone. He simply walked to the center of the room, placed a small digital recorder beside the tiered cake, and said, "Before you call this forgiveness, we should all hear what it actually was." That was the moment my family stopped laughing. I grew up in a house where apologies only moved in one direction. My parents, Margaret and Arthur Vance, had 3 children. My older brother, Sebastian, was the investment child because he had our father's surname and a jawline my mother called leadership material. My younger sister, Serafina, was the tender child because she cried beautifully and often. I was the sturdy child, which meant nobody was expected to apologize to me because I could survive whatever they did to me. My mother used to say it almost lovingly. Alara is our sturdy one. Sturdy, like a kitchen chair, like a bookshelf, like something useful that does not bruise or complain. By the age of 8, I was waking Serafina for school because she hated alarms. By 11, I was marking Sebastian's essays because he was too creative for details. By 13, I knew the exact angle to hold my father's disappointment so it would not spill onto anyone else. Have you ever been praised for your strength by the very people who created the weight you are carrying? At family parties, I washed the dishes while Serafina performed piano. At birthdays, I cut the cake while Sebastian opened the largest gifts. When relatives complimented me, it was always for being helpful, never for being happy. If I ever cried, my mother lowered her voice and said, "Not here, Alara. You know better than that." I did know better. That was the problem. I knew better than to need anything, better than to complain, and better than to tell the truth in a room where comfort had already been assigned to someone else. My father did not yell much. He specialized in the art of quiet disappointment. "Do not punish the family with your mood," he would say. He said it when Serafina borrowed my best dress and ripped it. He said it when Sebastian sold my bicycle without asking. He said it when Dominic, years later, stole £14,200, and everyone decided my reaction was the real family emergency. That sentence trained me better than any school ever could. Do not punish the family with your mood. In other words, absorb the damage and keep smiling afterward. I became a pediatric nurse, because hospitals made sense to me in a way home never did. Pain had clear names there. Bleeding was not called sensitivity. A fever was not called an attitude problem. If a patient could not breathe, nobody asked whether they were making the rest of the room feel uncomfortable. We treated what was actually happening. I was good at that work, and I still am. For a long time, I mistook a lack of conflict for healing. Calm was just the skill I had built because my family could not tolerate the truth. I met Dominic Sterling when I was 23, during my final year of university. He was charming in a restless, frantic way, always talking about the future, as if the future owed him money. He wanted to open a boutique mobile coffee business. He had sketches, slogans, spreadsheets, and a talent for making other people feel boring if they asked basic practical questions. My mother adored him because he filled any silence quickly. Serafina adored him because he flirted with everyone just enough to keep the room tilted toward him. My father liked that Dominic used words like scale and equity. I liked that he actually noticed me. That is embarrassing to admit now, but the truth often is. I was so used to being useful that being noticed felt like a form of love. For almost a year, Dominic was kind enough in public and needy enough in private to keep me attached. He borrowed my car and returned it on fumes. He forgot his wallet at every restaurant. He needed a temporary bridge for business permits, then inventory, then a van repair, then a branding deposit. I lent him the money because he promised it was ours, our future, our little shop, our shared risk. By the time I discovered the truth, the account my grandmother had helped me build for my NMC registration fees and my first flat deposit was nearly empty. 14,200 pounds was gone in transfers. I had approved under immense pressure, plus several withdrawals he made after memorizing my PIN. When I finally confronted him, Dominic cried. Not the broken kind of tears, but the strategic kind. He said he felt ashamed. He said he had planned to pay it back before I ever realized it was gone. He said if I reported him to the police, I would destroy him over a simple misunderstanding. Then, he called my mother. I arrived at my parents' house that evening, expecting support. I brought my bank statements in a folder. I had highlighted the dates, and even written a timeline because nurses make charts when they are terrified. My family was waiting in the sitting room. Dominic sat beside Serafina on the sofa, his head bowed in mock shame. My mother had tissues ready. For him? I asked. He stole from me. My father looked at the papers but did not pick them up. Your name is on the transfers, Alara. You gave him access. He pressured me. Serafina sniffed loudly. He is clearly in a mental health crisis, Alara. My mother said. Maybe this is your chance to practice true forgiveness before you spend your life caring for strangers. Practice forgiveness. That was how the first version of the lie was born. It wasn't an accusation. It was presented as a virtue. My pain became a training exercise for my career. Dominic's theft became my moral test. My father added, if you cannot forgive one desperate mistake, maybe the NHS will harden your heart. I remember looking down at the highlighted pages and understanding that evidence cannot help you in a room committed to misunderstanding it. Dominic promised to repay me, but of course, he never did. We broke up a week later. The official family story settled into place quickly. Alara overreacted. Dominic panicked. And the breakup proved I had a problem with Grace. For 5 years, they used him like a mirror held up to my supposed flaws. If I set a boundary, my mother said. This is exactly what happened with Dominic. If I refused to lend Sebastian money, my father said, you punish people forever, don't you? If Seraphine forgot my birthday and I sounded hurt, she said, you have never understood how to truly let go. That is how families rewrite a crime. They do not need to erase every fact. They only need to change the moral of the story. Then I met Alistair Thorne. He was not loud, nor was he flashy. He did not talk about the future like it was a sales pitch. He worked as an evidence technician for the Crown Prosecution Service, cataloging recordings, transcripts, and case files. He believed in timestamps the way some people believe in luck. We met in the A&E department when he brought in a file box after a minor shunt in his car. He had a bruise on his cheek and apologized to the triage nurse for bleeding on the paperwork. I laughed before I could stop myself. He asked for my name. I said, Alara. He said, Alara, do you always look like you are solving 3 emergencies that belong to other people? I should have been offended, but instead I almost cried. Our first date was at a quiet tea room that served scones that were too warm and tea that was slightly too weak. Alistair asked questions slowly, like he was not just waiting for his turn to speak. When I told him I had trouble choosing what I wanted from the menu, he said, then we can start with what you do not want. No one had ever made refusal feel like a valid beginning. He proposed 2 years later on our flat's balcony, under a string of fairy lights that kept flickering because he had bought the cheap ones from the local shop. He said he loved how I stayed calm in storms, but he did not want to be another storm I had to survive. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. My family liked him at first because he was polite. Polite people are often mistaken for being controllable. Alistair attended Sunday roasts, birthdays, Serafina's charity fundraisers, and Sebastian's new business parties. He watched everything. He watched my mother assign me kitchen tasks before I had even taken off my coat. He watched my father interrupt me but listen intently when Sebastian repeated the exact same point. He watched Serafina turn every single announcement into a weather system centered on her own feelings. On the drive home from one dinner, Alistair said. Your family has a constitution, Ilara. I laughed. What? Unwritten rules. Your sister gets tenderness, your brother gets excuses, and you get the work. I said. That's just family. He looked at the road ahead. No, Ilara. That is just yours. At first, I defended them. I had decades of practice. Serafina was anxious. Sebastian was overwhelmed. Dad was old-fashioned. Mum meant well. Alistair never argued with me. He simply kept noticing. Then the wedding planning started, and my family realized marriage would change their access to me. A husband who loved me clearly would make it harder to use me quietly. A household with firm boundaries would make it harder to summon me at a moment's notice. A man who documented things for a living would make it harder to call theft a misunderstanding. That was when Dominic Sterling reappeared. The first message came from Serafina. It was a photo of a pub table set for 4. The caption read, "Guess who ran into Dominic? He asked about you. He says he hopes you're happy." My stomach went ice cold. I did not answer. 2 days later, my mother called. "I know this may surprise you," she said in her gentle voice. "The one that always arrived right before a demand, but Dominic has changed." I stood in the hospital corridor with my phone pressed to my ear. "Why are we talking about Dominic?" "Because healing matters, Ilara." "No, Mum. No." She exhaled sharply. "You are about to marry. Marriage requires a capacity for forgiveness. Alistair has never stolen from me. That is not the point. It is the entire point." My mother's voice sharpened instantly. "Do not be childish." There it was. Childish, the word adults use when they want obedience to look like a lack of maturity. I told Alistair that night. I expected him to be angry, but instead, he became very still. "Do you think they are inviting him to something?" he asked. "No, they wouldn't." The words left my mouth before my mind could approve them. They wouldn't. The prayer of every person who knows someone probably would. Alistair did not say anything to contradict me. He just asked me to forward the messages to him. I did. After that, the campaign became softer and more frequent. Serafina sent screenshots of Dominic volunteering at a soup kitchen. My father said redemption deserved witnesses. My mother said the wedding should not begin under the shadow of unforgiveness. Dominic even sent a message to Alistair trying to sound reasonable. "Hope we can be adults at the event. Her family wants peace. I am willing if she is." Alistair showed me the screen. I stared at it. "What event?" I asked. "That is a good question," Alistair replied. My mother had posted the hen-do invitations herself. I had seen the guest list, and Dominic was certainly not on it. I called her immediately. "Is Dominic invited to my hen-do?" There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough. Serafina thought it might help. I closed my eyes. "Help who?" "Everyone, Ilara." "Mum. He stole from me." "He hurt you." "Yes, but he didn't murder anyone." "What do you do when the people who raised you keep reducing your wound until it can fit inside their comfort?" I said. "If Dominic is there, I will leave." My mother answered. "Then you will only embarrass yourself." For the first time in my life, I did not argue. I simply hung up. Alistair found me sitting on the bathroom floor 10 minutes later, not crying, just breathing as if breathing had become a manual task. He sat beside me. "You do not have to go," he said. "If I don't, they will tell everyone I'm unstable." "Yes, they will. If I do go, they will use him against me." "Yes. So I lose either way." Alistair took my hand. "Only if the goal is making them approve of you. What if the goal is simply seeing things clearly?" That was the first crack in the old wall. Seeing clearly. Not winning. Not pleasing. Not proving I was forgiving enough to deserve love. Just seeing. 3 nights before the hen-do, Dominic called Alistair. Alistair did not answer, so Dominic left a voicemail. I was asleep when it happened. Alistair later told me he stood in the kitchen at 1:17 inches the morning, listening with the refrigerator hum behind him, and his whole body going cold. Dominic's voice was loose with drink but precise with intention. He said, "I know her family told you this is about forgiveness. It isn't. They want to see if you're man enough to handle her history. Serafina says Ilara still acts like a victim. Margaret thinks if you see how dramatic she gets around me, you'll think twice about the wedding. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I just think you deserve the full picture before you trap yourself." Then he laughed. That laugh was the sound of the old story trying to poison my new life. Alistair saved the voicemail in 3 places: his phone, his laptop, and an external drive. Then he wrote down the date, the time, the number, and the exact words in a notebook. Evidence people do not trust memory when someone else's life depends on it. He did not wake me up. He has since apologized for that, and I have accepted it, but I understand why he waited. He told me later, "If I had played one drunk message right then, you would have found a way to explain it away for them." He was right. So, he gathered more. He searched his texts. Dominic had sent 2 earlier messages trying to sound reasonable. Serafina had sent Alistair an invitation correction by accident that included Dominic's name in a side note. My mother had emailed the caterer a revised count with Dominic listed as a family friend. Serafina had even left a voice memo for Alistair after too much wine, saying, "Just be patient with Alara. We are testing whether she can finally let the past be the past." Testing. Again. Always a test, never any accountability. Alistair called my cousin Beatrice, the only relative who had ever asked me direct questions. Beatrice worked as a paralegal and had a gift for finding documents people assumed nobody cared about. She remembered Dominic. She remembered that old sitting room meeting. She remembered my mother's exact phrase, "Practice forgiveness." Beatrice sent Alistair a photograph from 5 years earlier, taken accidentally during a family dinner. In the background, Dominic stood beside Serafina, smiling at my mother while my folder of bank statements sat unopened on the coffee table. It was not dramatic proof, but it was worse. It was the image of evidence ignored in plain sight. Then Beatrice found the text thread. Her mother, my Aunt Dorothea, had forwarded family gossip at the time. Margaret says Alara is making Dominic's mistake about money instead of growth. Arthur says the girl needs a forgiveness lesson. A forgiveness lesson. Alistair printed everything. He finally told me 2 days before the hen do. He put a cup of tea on the table and said, "I need you to hear something that will hurt, but it will not surprise the part of you that already knows." I hate how accurate that was. He played the voicemail. Dominic's voice filled our kitchen, explaining my family's plan like he had been hired to narrate my humiliation. Serafina says Alara still acts like a victim. Margaret thinks if you see how dramatic she gets around me, you'll slow the wedding down. My body went completely still. Then the shaking started. Alistair reached for me, but I lifted a hand, not because I did not want him, but because for once I needed to feel the truth before anyone comforted me away from it. There was no forgiveness test. There was never a moral lesson. There was a plan to use my old wound as evidence against my readiness to be loved. The first words I said were, "My mother invited him." Alistair nodded. My sister helped. "Yes. My father knows. He knows enough." I laughed once. It sounded nothing like laughter. "They are going to call this healing." "Yes, they are. What do we do?" He looked at me for a long moment. "That depends. Do you want to avoid pain? Or do you want to stop protecting the people causing it?" That question sat between us like a lit match. I wanted to avoid pain, of course I did. Anyone who says otherwise has never spent a life being punished for noticing things. But I wanted something else more. I wanted the old story to end in a room where it could not be quietly repaired. "We go to the hen do," I said. Alistair nodded. "And if they bring him, we tell the truth. No screaming? No screaming. No performance? No performance. Just receipts." He slid the printed folder across the table. "Always." The hen do was held at the parish hall because my mother loved rooms that made modest families look established. White tablecloths, rented greenery, elderflower cordial in glass dispensers, framed childhood photographs on a display table. Most of the photos included Serafina smiling at the center while I appeared beside her holding something, a balloon string, a tray, a younger cousin's hand. My mother kissed my cheek when I arrived. "Let us have a beautiful day," she whispered. Translation: "Cooperate with the lie." Serafina wore lavender and floated from table to table as if she were the bride and I had been hired to provide context. Sebastian stood near the drinks, telling a story about a promotion he had not actually earned yet. My father adjusted the microphone for the toasts. Alistair stayed beside me, calm and watchful. He wore a gray suit and the expression of a man reading a transcript no one else knew existed. Dominic Sterling arrived 20 minutes late. Of course he did. People like Dominic love entrances, because entrances let them measure the room's appetite for them. He wore a navy blazer, no tie, and a face arranged into a mask of humble regret. My mother rushed to greet him before I could speak. "Alara," she called out too brightly. "Look who came to wish you well." Wish me well, the language of violence with a ribbon tied around it. Every table turned. Conversations thinned. I felt the old machine start up inside me. Smile. Swallow. Do not humiliate the family. My hand moved toward the cake server because objects had always given me somewhere to hide. Alistair touched my wrist once. I did not pick it up. Dominic approached with both hands visible, like a man entering a church. "Alara," he said. "You look well." I said nothing. He turned to Alistair. "You're a lucky man. She's complicated, but she's loyal." A few relatives chuckled. My mother laughed softly. That is one way to put it. The first toast came from Serafina. She spoke about sisters, healing, and how weddings bring old chapters together. Then she gestured toward Dominic. "I know not everyone understands our family," she said, looking at me with wet eyes. "But we believe love means facing what hurt you, and proving it no longer controls you." "Proving?" My father nodded like a judge approving a sentence. Serafina lifted her glass. "To Alara and Alistair. May their marriage be strong enough for forgiveness." The room clapped, and then Dominic stood up. He had not been on the toast list. I knew because I had made it. He smiled apologetically and held up one hand. "Just a minute. I promise." My mother did not stop him. My father did not stop him. Serafina looked almost radiant. Dominic turned toward Alistair. "I hurt Alara years ago. I own that. But sometimes people hold on to pain because it gives them an identity. If she has truly grown, she should be able to thank the past for shaping her." That was the line. Thank the past. Thank the thief. Thank the wound for teaching me how to limp gracefully. I heard a fork drop somewhere. Alistair stood up. He did not raise his voice. "Dominic, who exactly asked you to come today?" Dominic blinked. "The family did." "Which member specifically?" "This isn't a courtroom, Alistair." "No," Alistair said. "That is why I'm asking you a simple question." My mother stood up. "Alistair, please. This is a celebration." Alistair looked at her. "Then let us celebrate honesty." He reached into his jacket and placed the digital recorder beside the cake. The room changed immediately. "People do not fear objects unless they know objects can outlive a tone of voice," he said. "Before anyone calls this forgiveness, everyone deserves to know what was arranged." My father's face darkened. "Turn that thing off. It isn't even on yet," Alistair said. Serafina whispered, "You're being cruel." I looked at her. "No, he is being precise." That was the first sentence I said loud enough for the whole room to hear. Alistair pressed play. Dominic's voice entered the room. "I know her family told you this is about forgiveness. It isn't. They want to see if you're man enough to handle her history." No one moved. Serafina says Alara still acts like a victim. "Margaret thinks if you see how dramatic she gets around me, you'll slow the wedding down." The voicemail continued. Every word crossed the white tablecloths and landed where politeness could no longer cover it. When it ended, nobody clapped. Nobody laughed. Nobody asked for cake. Dominic spoke first. "I was drunk." Alistair replied, "You were coherent." My mother said, "That was private." I said, "So was my bank account." The line came out before I could even plan it, and a ripple moved through the room. Not laughter, but recognition. My father said, "Alara, do not do this." I turned to him. "Do what? Punish us? For telling the truth? For dragging family matters in front of guests?" I looked around the room. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, co-workers, women from my mother's church circle, people who had accepted versions of me passed through my family's mouth for years. "They invited my ex to my hen do," I said. "The family matter was already public. I am just removing the ribbon." Beatrice stood near the back wall. She held up a folder. "There is more," she said. My mother's eyes shot to her. "Beatrice!" Beatrice did not sit down. 5 years ago, Aunt Margaret told everyone Dominic's theft was a forgiveness lesson. I have the texts. Dominic's face changed. So did Serafina's. I realized then that the hen do was not the final room. It was just the first public crack. Alistair closed the recorder. "We are leaving." Serafina rushed forward. "Alara, please, do not ruin your own hen do." I looked at the untouched cake, the flowers, the framed photos that proved I had spent a childhood holding things for other people. "I am not ruining it," I said. "I am refusing to stand inside it." We walked out. Behind us, voices rose at once. My mother crying. My father demanding the folder. Dominic insisting everyone misunderstood him. Serafina was saying my name over and over like she could pull me back into position by sound alone. Outside, the afternoon was bright and almost offensively normal. Alistair opened the car door for me. I sat down, and only then did I start shaking hard enough that my teeth clicked together. He got in, started the engine, then waited. I said, "They will fix the story." "Yes." I looked at him. "Can we stop them?" He reached into the back seat and lifted the printed binder. "We can make the next room harder to repair." The next room was the wedding eve dinner. My mother called it off that evening. then called it back on the next morning, then called me 16 times. I answered none of them. My father left one voicemail, saying he expected me to behave like an adult. Serafina sent a message that said, "I hope you're proud of breaking Mum." Dominic sent nothing. Men like him know when a room has turned dangerous. Alistair and I considered canceling everything. We had already moved the wedding ceremony to a smaller garden owned by his aunt. We did not need the Eve dinner. We did not need one more performance under my family's chandeliers. But Beatrice called and said, "If you don't come, they will turn the hen-do into proof that you are unstable." She was right. My family had spent years turning absence into an admission of guilt. If I stayed away, they would describe my silence for me. So, we went. The dinner took place at the Bellamy House, a restaurant with exposed brick, low lights, and private rooms for families who like their dysfunction served with linen napkins. There were 38 people because my mother had expanded the guest list after the hen-do. That was her way. When the truth threatened her, she gathered more witnesses for the version she preferred. We arrived 10 minutes late on purpose, not dramatically late, just enough that the room had to stop and look. Dominic was there. I had expected it and still felt the old drop in my stomach. He sat near my parents in a blue shirt, looking sober, penitent, and strategically wounded. Serafina sat beside him. My mother had placed an empty chair for me across from both of them. Alistair looked at the chair, then at me. I said, "No." We moved our place cards to the other end of the table. That small act caused more panic than shouting would have. Dinner was tense. My father gave a toast about unity, almost choking on the word. My mother thanked everyone for supporting the family through a difficult misunderstanding. Serafina kept touching Dominic's sleeve like she was reminding him when to look sad. After the salad plates were cleared, my mother stood up. "Alara," she said, "before tomorrow, we need healing. Dominic has something he would like to say." Of course, they had learned nothing except the need for a better stage. Dominic stood slowly. "I want to apologize for my tone at the hen-do. I was invited because your family believed we could all grow past pain. I said things poorly, but I do hope Alara learns that forgiveness is not weakness." The room murmured approval, and then my mother looked at me. "Alara, would you like to respond with grace?" With grace, another leash disguised as a compliment. I stood up. "Yes," I said, "I would." Alistair placed the binder on the table. Beatrice stood near the wall with her own copies. I had asked her to be there not as backup, but as a witness. There is a difference. I looked at Dominic first. 5 years ago, you took £14,200 from me through pressure and unauthorized access. My family called it a forgiveness lesson. Last month, my mother and sister invited you to my hen-do without my consent. 3 nights before that hen-do, you told my fiancé the purpose was to make me look unstable so he might delay the wedding. My mother said, "That isn't fair." I turned to her. "I am done making the truth fair. To the people who made it necessary. Truth does not become cruelty just because liars feel exposed." The room went silent. Alistair played the voicemail again, but this time he followed it with the documents. Serafina's message to him. My mother's caterer email listing Dominic as a family friend. Beatrice's old texts from Aunt Dorothea. Bank records showing the transfers. The photograph of my unopened evidence folder on the coffee table 5 years earlier. Not one item was enough alone, but together, they became a map. My father tried to interrupt after the 3rd page. "This is excessive." Alistair looked at him. "No. Excessive was inviting the man who financially exploited your daughter to her bridal event and calling it moral growth." Nobody spoke. Serafina broke first. "I was trying to help." I asked. "Help who?" She looked at Dominic, then at my mother. I waited. Nurses know how to wait in rooms where people are avoiding pain. Waiting is sometimes the cleanest instrument. Serafina's eyes filled. "Mum was worried Alistair would take you away from us." There it was. Not forgiveness, but access and control. Fear that marriage would move me out of reach. My mother snapped. "Serafina!" But the room had heard it. Serafina kept going because once the first true sentence escapes, others sometimes follow it out. She said, "If Alistair saw how bitter you still were, he would understand we had concerns." She said, "Dominic could show him what you become when you don't get your way." I looked at my mother. For the first time in my life, I did not feel afraid of her disappointment. I felt tired of financing it. "Mum," I said, "you were willing to reopen the worst financial betrayal of my life because you were afraid I would stop being available." Her face tightened. "That is a hateful way to describe a mother's concern. No, I said. It is an accurate way. My father pushed back his chair. Enough, Beatrice said. Let her finish. That was when I noticed something. Chairs were turning slowly, quietly. Not all of them, but enough. Relatives who had spent years facing my mother were turning toward me. Dominic tried one final performance. I never wanted to hurt you, Alara. I looked at him, and for once I saw him clearly. Not as the man who ruined me. Not as proof that I was hard to love. Just a weak, greedy person, who had been useful to stronger manipulators. You did hurt me, I said, and then you accepted an invitation to do it again. He sat down. Alistair took my hand. My father said my name once, low and warning. Alara. I turned to him. No. That was the whole answer, not a speech, not an explanation, just no. It landed in the room like furniture being moved after decades in one place. My mother started crying, then softly at first, then harder when no one rushed to comfort her. Serafina looked at her, then at me, trapped between the performance that had fed her and the truth that had finally exposed it. I picked up the binder. Our wedding is tomorrow, I said. The location has changed. The guest list has changed. If you received a message from Alistair or me, you are welcome. If you did not, please do not come. My mother gasped. You cannot exclude your own parents. I looked at her for a long moment. You excluded me from safety inside my own family for 30 years. You do not get to stand beside me while I choose a life you tried to sabotage. My father looked older suddenly. Not sorry, older. There is a difference. We left before dessert. This time, the room did not erupt behind us. It stayed quiet, consequence, quiet. Outside, Alistair asked, Are you okay? I thought about lying automatically. Then I stopped. No, I said. But I am free. Freedom can hurt and still be healing. We got married the next afternoon in Alistair's aunt's garden, with 23 people present. No grand ballroom, no seating chart designed by my mother, no Dominic, no Serafina in a lavender dress pretending to bless what she had tried to fracture. No father walking me down an aisle he had spent years making narrower. Beatrice stood beside me. Alistair's brother officiated. The flowers came from a local market. The cake leaned slightly because Alistair's aunt made it herself and insisted gravity was part of its charm. It was perfect because nothing in it required me to disappear. Before the ceremony, I stood in a small upstairs bedroom looking at myself in the mirror. I expected grief to ruin the moment, but instead, grief sat beside joy like an honest guest. I missed the parents I had hoped would come. I did not miss the parents who actually existed. Can you grieve people while being relieved they are not in the room? Yes, you can. Both things can be true. Alistair read vows he had written on index cards. Of course he used index cards, evidence technician to the end. He said, I promise never to confuse your calm with consent. I promise to ask what you want, not what you can survive. I promise to keep records only when the world tries to deny you, and to keep memories when the world is kind. I cried openly. Nobody told me to stop. When it was my turn, I said, I spent my life believing love meant swallowing the sharp parts so no one else would bleed. You taught me love can be a hand around mine while I tell the truth. I choose that. I choose you. I choose the version of myself who does not have to be useful to be worthy. Beatrice sobbed so loudly the officiant had to pause. The garden guests laughed gently, not at me, but with me. That difference matters. My mother sent a text that night. It said, I hope the scene was worth losing your family. I read it once while sitting on the hotel bed in my wedding dress, my shoes kicked off, Alistair brushing cake crumbs from his sleeve. I expected the sentence to crawl under my skin and start giving orders. Instead, it looked small. One line of old poison on a bright screen. I showed Alistair. He asked, Do you want to respond? I thought about it not because she deserved an answer, but because I deserved to choose, rather than react. I typed, I did not lose my family today. I stopped being used by it. Then I deleted it. Not every true sentence needs to be mailed to the people who trained themselves not to read. I took a screenshot, saved it in the digital binder, and put the phone face down. That night, Alistair and I ate leftover cake from a paper plate and watched a terrible movie in a hotel room that smelled like clean sheets and lemon soap. It was not glamorous. It was ours. The next week, the family divided itself the way families do after truth enters with documents. Some people called to apologize for laughing. Some sent long messages explaining why they had stayed silent. Some said they had always known something was wrong, which made me angry in a different way. Knowing quietly is not the same as standing beside someone. Beatrice came over with soup and a hard drive of family photos. "I thought you might want the pictures where you are actually smiling," she said. We spent an afternoon deleting nothing but moving images into folders with accurate names. Ilara carrying trays. Ilara holding babies. Ilara standing behind Serafina. Ilara actually happy. It sounds small, but sorting those photos became a kind of therapy. History is not only what happened, it is what gets labeled. For years, my family labeled sacrifice as personality. They labeled theft as growth. They labeled sabotage as concern. They labeled my boundaries as cruelty. Now I was labeling things correctly. There is power in that. Dominic tried to contact me 2 weeks later. He sent an email with the subject line, "Closure." I did not open it at first because closure is one of those words selfish people love. It sounds generous while asking you to do more labor for them. Eventually, with Alistair beside me, I read it. Dominic wrote that he had been manipulated by my family. He wrote that Serafina had made him feel important. He wrote that he had only come to the Hindu because my mother insisted it would help everyone move forward. He wrote 6 paragraphs, and not one contained the words, "I stole your money." I forwarded it to a solicitor, not because I planned to sue him immediately, but because my days of treating documents like feelings were over. Documents are documents. They belong where they can be handled properly. The solicitor sent Dominic a letter requesting repayment and warning him not to contact me again. He replied within 48 hours, offering a payment plan. That told me everything. He knew what he had done. He had always known. He had simply been protected by a family willing to call my loss a lesson. The first payment arrived in July, £200. Small, almost insulting. I stared at it in my account and felt no triumph. Money does not repair the version of yourself that believed betrayal was an education, but it does correct one column in the ledger. I transferred the payment into a new savings account named Quiet Future. Alistair laughed when he saw the name. Then he added £50 of his own and said, "Interest." Serafina did not apologize, not at first. She posted quotes online about family betrayal, women being silenced, and how difficult it is to be misunderstood by people you love. She received sympathetic comments from people who had not heard the recording. I learned that not every audience gets access to the truth. Some people choose the performance because the performance asks less of them. For a while, I checked her posts every night like pressing a bruise. Then Beatrice came over, took my phone, and asked, "Do you want information or injury?" I said, "I don't know. That means injury." She was right. I muted Serafina. Silence from a distance feels different from silence under command. One is erasure, the other is rest. My father wrote a letter in August. Not a good letter, a real one, which was better. He said he had watched the voicemail change the room and had understood too late that he had spent my childhood keeping peace for everyone except the child paying for it. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not mention my mother's feelings. He did not call the dinner a scene. He wrote, "I taught you that calm mattered more than truth, because calm was easier for me." I read that sentence 6 times. Then I put the letter in a drawer. Forgiveness, I have learned, is not an elevator someone else can summon. It is a locked room inside you. You decide when the door opens, if it opens, and whether anyone gets to enter. My father is still outside that room. I do not hate him there. I simply do not rush to let him in. My mother did not write a real letter. She sent messages through other relatives. She told my aunt she was heartbroken. She told a church friend Alistair had poisoned me against my family. She told Serafina that daughters today confuse independence with disrespect. She told everyone a different version, because when truth is not your goal, consistency is optional. For a while, that hurt. Then it became useful. Every new version proved she was not trying to understand. She was trying to win. Once I saw that, I stopped attending the trial in my head. I had already given the testimony that mattered. The first holiday was strange, not bad. Christmas arrived that year with its usual smells coming from everywhere except my own childhood kitchen. I worked the morning shift at the hospital because bank holiday pay is helpful, and because sick children do not pause for family drama. After work, I drove home expecting sadness to hit me in the car park. Instead, I found Alistair in the kitchen making stuffing from a recipe he had clearly misunderstood. There were apples in it, far too many apples. Beatrice was on the floor assembling a puzzle with Alistair's niece. Our neighbor had brought round a mince pie. The table was small, mismatched, and completely full. Nobody asked me to cut the cake. Nobody asked me to handle a difficult person because I was good at it. Nobody invited a ghost from my past to prove I had evolved enough to tolerate disrespect with a smile. At dinner, Alistair raised his glass. "To accurate labels," he said, Beatrice added. "And saved receipts." I laughed so hard I cried. Later that night, I stood alone in the kitchen rinsing plates, and realized I was washing dishes because I wanted a moment of quiet, not because anyone had assigned me the job. Alistair came in and said, "You don't have to do that." "I know. Do you want help?" "Yes." He picked up a tea towel. That is what healing looks like sometimes. Not a grand apology. Not a family suddenly understanding everything, just someone standing beside you at a sink, asking whether help is welcome, and then believing your answer. I thought of the younger version of me who had believed love meant being low maintenance. I wanted to reach back and tell her, "You were never low maintenance. You were under-supported. Being easy to use is not the same as being loved." People ask whether the recordings were too much. They ask if private shame should have stayed private. They ask whether playing Dominic's voicemail in front of relatives was harsh. I understand the question. I even respect parts of it. But here is the truth. Privacy had already been weaponized against me. My family had used private rooms to create public lies. They had told relatives I was unforgiving. They had invited Dominic into a public space and made my reaction the performance. They had turned my old wound into a group activity. So, no, the recording was not too much. It was a proportionate amount of light. When someone drags your story into a room and rewrites it, you are allowed to bring the original text. That is what Alistair did. That is what Beatrice did. That is what I finally learned to do for myself. I still work in pediatrics. I still know how to stay calm when something is wrong, but the calm feels different now. It is not silence. It is not submission. It is a tool I use, not a cage I live in. A month after the wedding, a teenage patient asked me why adults always say sorry doesn't count unless you accept it. I had to stop my charting for a second. I told her, an apology belongs to the person who gives it. Acceptance belongs to the person who is hurt. They are not the same object. She looked at me like I had handed her a key. Maybe I had. Maybe that is the quiet work now, handing keys to people before someone convinces them the locked room is their fault. Serafina finally called in December from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered not because I owed her access, but because I trusted myself to end the call. She sounded smaller without an audience. "Alara," she said. "I didn't think Mum would take it that far." I closed my eyes. There it was. The first attempt to put the weight elsewhere. "You took it far enough," I said. "I know." Silence. Then she said, "I liked being the one everyone protected. I thought if you got married, they would start needing me less." That was the first honest thing she had ever said to me. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I don't know." "Then find out before you call again." I hung up gently. That may sound cold to someone who has never been used as a family utility. It felt merciful to me. I did not rescue her. I left her alone with herself. Some people meet truth only after every audience leaves. In January, Beatrice and I met for coffee. She brought the old photo from 5 years earlier, the one with my unopened folder on the coffee table. She had printed it and written on the back, "Evidence ignored is still evidence." I keep it now in the binder. Not because I want to live in the past, but because the past is part of the record, and records protect people who have been trained to doubt themselves. When I feel the old reflex return, when I almost explain too much, apologize too fast, or make someone else's discomfort my assignment, I open the binder. I look at the texts, the voicemail transcript, the old photo, my mother's messages, my father's letter. Then I close it. The point of proof is not to stare at it forever. The point is to let it stand guard while you live your life. So, if you are listening to this with your chest tight, because someone in your life calls cruelty, honesty, theft, confusion, pressure, concern, or humiliation a test, I want you to hear me. You are allowed to name what happened before everyone agrees. You are allowed to keep records. You are allowed to leave the room before the cake is cut. And if someone says forgiveness requires you to sit beside the person who harmed you while they perform growth at your expense, remember this. Forgiveness that demands your silence is not healing. It is management. A boundary is not bitterness, it is a receipt. If this story found you at the right time, please like this video for Winds of Thought. It helps this reach another person who may still be sitting at the table, smiling while everyone calls their pain a lesson. Subscribe if you want more stories about the moment women stop shrinking to keep the peace. And tell me in the comments, what did they call it when you finally knew it was wrong? My name is Alara Thorne now. I am still calm. I am still strong. I am still good at holding steady when a room gets loud. But I no longer use my strength to make other people comfortable with hurting me. There is a cake server in our kitchen drawer, silver handle, simple blade. Alistair bought it because he said we should own one that did not come with a family history. We used it on our first anniversary to cut a small chocolate cake that leaned almost as badly as our wedding cake. I made the first cut. Not even. Not careful. Not hiding just mine. There was one more consequence I did not expect. After the wedding eve dinner, several relatives began sending me their own memories, not as gossip, but as corrections to the record. Aunt Lillian wrote that she remembered the year Serafina broke my grandmother's vase, and everyone told me to apologize for being near it. A cousin sent a photo from a Christmas morning, where I was in the corner holding bin bags, while Sebastian and Serafina opened gifts in the center of the room. Beatrice found a video of my mother saying, "Ilara likes helping," while I carried 6 plates past a table full of seated adults. None of those things were crimes. They were not dramatic enough to explain my whole life to a stranger. But together, they became context. That is what people forget about emotional harm. It often arrives too small for a headline. A chair moved away, a laugh at the wrong time, a correction no one applies to anyone else. A child praised for needing nothing until she believes needing nothing is the definition of love. For a while those messages made me furious. If they saw it, why didn't they say anything? Why did everyone wait until the hard part was over to admit the pattern existed? Then my therapist asked me a question I did not like. Would their silence have made you believe it faster or slower? I hated that question because the answer was slower. A lifetime of training is not undone by one witness. It is undone by repeated proof, and one safe person who does not benefit from your denial. Alistair was that person first. Beatrice became the second. Eventually, I became one too. My mother tried one final version of the story in February. She sent a handwritten invitation to Sunday lunch. The envelope was pale cream, her handwriting graceful, the kind of thing that would make anyone else think of reconciliation. Inside, she wrote, "We can all move forward if everyone agrees not to revisit the past." I read that line twice and felt nothing but clarity. Not revisit the past, that was her favorite spell. She did not want healing. She wanted a museum where all the exhibits were locked away and she held the only key. I put the invitation into the binder. Then I wrote back one sentence. I will not attend any dinner where the price of entry is pretending harm did not happen. I mailed it before I could soften it. For 3 days, I checked my phone expecting punishment. It did not come. Or maybe it did, and I no longer recognize silence as a punishment. That is another strange part of healing. The tools that once controlled you start looking ordinary. A guilt trip becomes just a sentence. A cold shoulder becomes just quiet. A smear campaign becomes information about the speaker. Your nervous system still flinches, but your adult mind stands beside it and says, "We have already seen this trick." Alistair framed the sentence I mailed back. He did it as a joke, mostly. He printed a copy on plain paper and put it near our entryway. Not where guests could see it, just where I would pass it every morning. The price of entry. It became our household rule. No relationship gets inside our home if the price of entry is my self-abandonment. Dominic completed 6 payments before he stopped. The solicitor sent a letter. He started again. I tell you that because stories like this often make justice sound clean, like one reveal fixes the ledger. It does not. Some people need consequences delivered in installments because that is the only language they recognize. The money mattered less than the direction. For the first time, something that had been taken from me was moving back toward me instead of away. Every payment went into the Quiet Future account. I used part of it to pay for a certification course in pediatric trauma-informed care. That felt right. I wanted the stolen money to become something useful to children who did not know yet why they froze when adults called them difficult. At the end of the course, the instructor asked us to write one sentence about what safety means. Other people wrote beautiful things about trust, warmth, and consistency. I wrote, "Safety is the moment your reality is not up for debate." That sentence made the instructor look up. She asked if I wanted to share more. I said, "Not today," and she respected that. Respect often feels like someone not pushing a door just because they found it unlocked. Serafina and I met once, almost a year later, at Beatrice's request. Not because Beatrice wanted reconciliation, but because Serafina had asked to apologize in a supervised place, and I felt strong enough to hear it without giving away more than I intended. We met in a public park. No parents, no relatives, no wine, no audience. Serafina looked different, less polished, more tired. Maybe more real. She said, "I thought if you were happy, there would be less room for me." It was such a sad sentence that for a moment, I saw the girl underneath the performance. The daughter taught that attention was food, and everyone else's joy was a famine. "I am sorry they taught you that," I said. Her face crumpled. Then I added, "But you still chose what you did with it." She nodded. That was the beginning of an apology I could respect. She said she was sorry for contacting Dominic, sorry for helping Mum invite him, sorry for laughing at moments she knew were wrong. She did not ask for a sisterly lunch. She did not ask to be in my life. She just gave the apology and let it sit on the bench between us. I told her I accepted that she was trying. I did not accept access. She cried. I let her. Then I went home. People sometimes think choosing yourself means becoming hard. That is not what happened to me. I became more tender because tenderness stopped being wasted on people who treated it like a loophole. At work, I started noticing the parents who apologize too much, and the children who apologize before asking for a glass of water. I noticed the nurse assistants who always stayed late because they were good at handling it. I noticed myself before I volunteered automatically. Instead of saying yes immediately, I learned to say, "Let me check." 3 plain words. Let me check. They saved me more times than any dramatic boundary speech. Let me check my schedule. Let me check my energy. Let me check whether this request is love or extraction. Let me check whether I am agreeing freely or obeying an old fear. Alistair loved that phrase. He would hear me say it on the phone and smile from across the room, not because he controlled the answer, but because he recognized the freedom in the pause. A pause is small, but so is a key. On our first anniversary, Alistair asked if I wanted to burn the binder. He did not mean it literally at first. He meant, did I still need the proof close enough to touch? I thought about it for a week. The answer was complicated. I did not want to live inside evidence forever. But I also did not want to pretend the evidence had stopped mattering just because I felt stronger. So we did something else. We scanned everything, stored copies with the solicitor, and placed the physical binder in a box on the top shelf of the cupboard. Not hidden, not worshipped, stored. That felt like progress. I kept 1 page out, the transcript of Dominic's voicemail, not because I wanted to punish myself, but because the last line had become a boundary stone. He had said the plan was not about forgiveness. He had meant to expose my weakness. Instead, he named the truth. Sometimes the people trying to bury you accidentally label the grave. I framed that transcript beside a photo from our wedding garden, the one where I am laughing with the leaning cake in the background. Proof and joy, side by side. That is the most honest decoration in our home. If my mother ever sees it, she will call it dramatic. Maybe it is. Maybe drama is what truth looks like when it finally stops whispering. I used to believe peace meant everyone staying low, plates passed politely, cake cut into even pieces. Now I know peace can sound like a chair scraping back from a table where you were never safe. Peace can be a door closing. Peace can be a recording played once. Peace can be 23 people in a garden instead of 38 people in a restaurant pretending a wound is a lesson. And peace can be the first slice of cake you cut for yourself without asking who needs the bigger piece. That is the life I have now. Not perfect, not painless mine. I still hear from people who were in that restaurant. Some apologize with courage. Some apologize with excuses. Some never mention it at all. I have stopped measuring my healing by who finally admits the truth. That is another freedom. The record exists whether they sign it or not. What I know is this. The woman who once held a cake server to avoid looking up now looks directly at rooms. She does not shout often. She does not need to. She has learned that a steady voice can move heavier things than rage ever could. So keep the original, whatever original means in your life. Keep the message. Keep the photo. Keep the bank statement. Keep the memory your body refuses to let them rename. Not so you can stay angry forever, but so you can stop calling your own clarity cruel. My family called it forgiveness. My fiancé called it evidence. I call it the day I finally believed myself, and that belief became home. Steady enough for every door I chose after that, together now and forever.